going to get the lovely Lena today. You get stuck with me. My name is Andy Tremblay. I'm fairly new here at Trails and Rails, so I'm really excited to welcome you all to Fab Friday with Lyle Henderson. He's going to get introduced here in just a second. But before we do that, I wanted to let you know some things that are going on here at the museum. And there are so many things I had to make a cheat sheet. I don't usually do that, okay? So I don't usually read off the things. But there are so many things happening here over the next month. The very first thing I wanted to let you guys know about, typically we have our Wagons West this weekend. And there's a little misinformation out there. It got moved. It is for a really good reason. We are celebrating our 50th anniversary on August 3rd. So Wagons West has been moved to August 3rd, and it's going to be a super blowout. We are going to have, hopefully, a higher balloon. We're going to have a melodrama. We are going to have an old-timey baseball game with 19? That's pretty old-timey, isn't it? At this point. 1890s rules. And some of our staff will be playing in that game. If you want to have a really good time, it might not be a serious game, but it's going to be a fun game. Come on out. It's going to be all afternoon. There'll be all kinds of things going on. We're really excited about it. Please celebrate with us. But before then, we're going to have a new traveling exhibit that we're really excited about. It's called The Boys of Summer, and it is the history of softball and baseball right here in Buffalo County. And it's going to open right over here where this exhibit's going to come down on Monday. So we invite you to all come out on June 20th, and it's going to run through mid-August. Our next Fab Friday is going to be on July 11th, and that will coincide with our baseball exhibit. It will be the history of baseball. It's going to be Gary Stickney. He's going to be here to talk about all of the fun things with the Yankees. Is that right, Lena?
I believe so, and more.
And more. All the things. All the things. We're also going to have a little pop-up quilt exhibit. It's the, you freaked me out with this name now. County Crossroads Quilting Guild. Say it 5 times fast. But we will have a number of quilts that are on display here within the museum. Really encourage you to come out and see that. That'll be here the entire month of July. Then we're also very excited that we're going to be screening The Littlest Hobo. And if you're not familiar with The Littlest Hobo, it actually stars Kearney's very first movie star, Landon the German Shepherd. He's adorable, you're gonna love him. Landon was a great success. Landon got to star in The Littlest Hobo, and he stars with Fleecy and Lamb. They're real good friends. And then it was such a popular movie that they decided to do a TV series on it as well. So we've got a special screening of that on July 14th. I believe it's gonna be at 7 p.m., more on that later, but really encourage you to come out and take a look at that. So many things coming up. But for today, Lyle is here to share all of his wonderful knowledge on saddle making, and Robin, please tell us more.
Okay, I'm Robin Smith. You pretty much said everything I wanted to say. Okay, good afternoon. I appreciate Lyle coming. I'm on the committee for Fabulous Fridays. This come up last fall. I can't remember if last fall we decided we'd try and get a hold of it. Sometime they said they could do it in June. Lyle and his family's been doing saddle making and harness making since the 1940s. I know my dad would come and have stuff done there. He's going to talk about the changes in saddle making or whatever over the years. And if you have questions, so anyway, would welcome Lyle and his program on saddles.
This is my wife, Linda.
And I don't have a microphone, so I'll talk loud.
And she's with me every day. Has been for 54 years. 55 years.
And you know, we work together, so people ask me, how do you do that? I don't know, we just do it. I couldn't do that with my spouse, but we do. So.
I always tell her, every time we have an anniversary, I said, boy, it's been quite the party. And she said, that's why I've had a headache all these years. But no, I was very fortunate to only have 2 jobs my entire life. That's working cow ranches and building saddles with my dad. And I will get to the Platte Valley Saddle later, but everybody knows how important horses was to the world, not just Nebraska, but that's what started people moving west and settling. And so there were some big saddle shops in Nebraska. The main supply, when they crossed the Mississippi, was St. Louis. Then it started getting settled, then went to Kansas City, and then Omaha. And Omaha had a large shop called the Collins Brothers.
It doesn't want to move.
You know, they're trying to get that. But the Collins Brothers come from,
You're getting your head.
Huh?
You're getting a little ahead of the pictures.
okay, well.
Let's get the pictures going. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay, I was going the wrong way.
Okay, this goes back to what I say, everybody knows the horse is very important.
You know, they farmed with them and they cut the sod for the soddies and everything with them. And I'm gonna be in everybody's way here, aren't I? Okay. Okay.
And the Collins brothers, their dad was a saddle maker in Illinois. And of course, it wasn't really the cowboy, real tough saddles. It was just transportation type saddles they put on their horses. And one of their, and then the Collins dad talked a tanner, which tanned leather, in Ohio to move to Illinois. And the tanner's son got to be really good friends with the Collins boys, which helped the Collins boys out really good down the road, because that friend was Ulysses S. Grant. And when he became president, then he made John Collins a president.
Secretary
yeah,
of the Sioux Indians
Secretary of the Sioux Indians.
in Fort Laramie.
And so in Fort Laramie, he had all the concessions. Like he sold all the settlers. He's the one that provided the harness and the saddles and whatever horse goods they needed. And then they went other places. They went to Cheyenne, and then they went to Billings, Montana, and then they opened a shop in Great Falls. But in the 1880s, there was a great blizzard called the Big Chinook, or Charlie Russell, the painter. He drew a skinny cow with wolves all around it, and he called it the last of the 10,000. Well, it pretty well wiped out the cattle industry in Montana and Wyoming. So the Collins brothers, they sold all them places and moved back to Omaha. But they also invented a stronger saddle for the cowboys that's coming out of Texas.
This is what they were riding at that time. Not only did they sore our horses back, but they were not very comfortable to sit in.
And you really couldn't rope off on them because it was all made out of wood, even the horn. And they invented the plane, what they call the Collins plane saddle. And it was tough. The rig that holds the cinches and stuff went clear up around the horn, and so you're working on the whole tree. And they invented a steel horn.
A tree is the foundation of the saddle, and it's usually made out of wood and then covered with rawhide. And so that's actually the important part of the saddle, that and the rigs. The rest of it's just kind of pretty.
Yeah.
Now this John Collins then, he went in with Morrison, King Collins and Morrison, but none of the historians have been able to find out who this Morrison was. So we don't know if it was just somebody who had some interest, monetary interest in it, or if he really was just made up. Maybe they thought it sounded better than John Morrison. So they formed that company in Omaha, and it was just around the corner from the Collins brothers.
It was on Farnham Street.
Yeah, and then who was the brother? You know, the two brothers that came into Omaha. So this is the other brother. He did not go to Cheyenne or to Fort Laramie.
No. John and his brother Gilbert. Gilbert, when they moved back to Omaha, he committed suicide.
Yeah.
And so John was the sole owner of it.
So anyway, Collins and Morrison were sold wholesale only.
Yeah. This is a saddle that Collins and Morrison built for Buffalo Bill. It's up to Cody, Wyoming. And they made silver there's one saddle about like this at where Buffalo Bill is buried, Lookout Mountain.
But they made a lot of it for his Cowboys and his Wild West show too.
Oh,
They
yeah.
probably weren't quite as fancy.
And then, so John, he started Collins and Morrison, finally got tired of that. So he sold it to Alfred Cornish. Well, Cornish already had bought the shop on Farnham Street. And so he just moved Collins and Morrison over in the old, because that's 1210 Farnham Street. And then go ahead with the.
Well, they were one of the first companies to publish a catalog. And there was a picture here of Cornish. Now, a lot of saddle makers actually didn't know how to make saddles. They were business people from back east. It was just a business for them, but some of them did. But anyway, here's that particular catalog, and that meant that other people from around the country could buy their saddles, which had, up until that time, if you lived back east, you didn't know anything about anything past the Missouri or the Mississippi River. You didn't know anything about it.
They always called these catalogs bunkhouse breeders. Because there was always a saddle catalog and a bunkhouse on the grid.
We saw the work harness at the beginning of our talk, and this is one of Cornish's show harness. So there's quite a bit of difference in how they're made. This one was all spotted up and fancy. This is a gold-mounted saddle made in 1911 by Cornish for the Union Pacific Railroad, and it had real gold conchos and things on it.
Well, it's for the Cheyenne Frontier Day.
Yeah.
They built them, I think, for 10 years.
This one went to the champion Rough Rider in the world at Cheyenne
Yeah.
in 1911. Now remember, all this is happening in Omaha. And there is President Theodore Roosevelt's saddle that was made by Alfred Cornish. We don't know a lot about Harness Bill, but we found a catalog. And this one, I don't know where it came from.
Now, he strictly was harness maker.
Yeah, he was strictly a harness maker, but it's an interesting catalog because he took pictures of people and told all about their farming and what they were using them for, and
He sold directly to farmers.
But it's fun to look at this, and I'm not sure what year this is. There's pictures from the Nebraska State Rodeo, State Fair, but anyway, the prices are something else again. You can buy a really fancy one for $55.75.
Now, that's a saddle. That means two horses.
Two horses, yeah. So, anyway, we find all this kind of interesting because it has to do with how, and this was actually called Omaha Tanning Company. And you're more than welcome to look at all this stuff. And this is the building that it had, Harness Bill, Omaha Tanning Company, harness direct to the farmer.
And I'm sure it was down toward the river.
Yeah, I was gonna say, do you know where that building is, or was?
I don't think it gives an address.
Okay.
It says Omaha, Nebraska.
Oh, that's how it is.
And, this was his, I call this the Corn King harness, because this is what they sold to the farmers to plant the corn. We know basically nothing about PH Toner Harness and Saddlery South Omaha. 2421 N Street. I don't know where that's at.
There's a lot of, every little burg there was had a harness shop. It didn't make any difference. Towns that you know, Hazard had a harness shop. Sweetwater had a harness shop. And actually, just north of the old Buda Schoolhouse, used to be Buckeye Valley. They were starting to build a town there, and the first thing that moves to town is a harness shop, because that's what everybody needed. And
If they weren't gonna buy a new one, they needed them repaired.
so yeah, every place had a harness, or if they didn't make them, they repaired them and then they sold harness from Alfred Cornish and Collins's. And then Harbin, they were started in Lincoln. And actually the building is in the Haymarket.
I did not get it on, there, but this is a recent picture of it down in the Haymarket. Vincenzo's Italian restaurant is in that building, and it says Harper Brothers and then building, and then it gives 808 P Street. And then on that same building, there's a plaque that says, in the early 20th century, as the saddlery industry became mechanized, wholesalers who previously supplied small harness makers moved into manufacturing. The Harper Brothers Company, started in 1884, was one of 3 Lincoln saddleries factories in 1905. We did not find out anything about the other 2. The Harbin 4-story building of 1903 was designed as both a wholesale warehouse and a harness and saddle factory, and housed 82 employees. When they started in 1903, it was just the 2 Harbin brothers that were working, and when they built this building, then they started hiring people. In 1912, the Harbin brothers added the horse collar factory, which is attached to the main building at the east rear. The Harbin brothers remained active until the mid-1950s, manufacturing harness, briefcases, golf bags, belts, and saddles. So that's down in the Haymarket, and got one. I got the
And
catalog.
I remember being in that building. I wasn't very old, but my dad knew all the saddle makers in all these different places. And I always was with him, and he always told me, he said, now, keep your hands off and your mouth shut. And he said, then we'll be welcome to come back. And so we always was, and I was in Cornish's too. And it was quite an experience. A lot of them old guys with a little kid, they'd talk to you and maybe give you a piece of wang leather or something. But that was quite a building. Then they started selling stuff for automobiles, like the tops and the isinglass for the windows, and we bought a lot of stuff from them. They went out of business in the 50s, middle 50s.
They even sold just about anything you want, but they sold, I just found it here.
A lot of these places are big into luggage.
Yeah, they built all kinds of luggage. Like I say, you're welcome to look through it.
And they made that.
Yeah, we need all that there. And big trunks. Remember when everybody had the big steamer trunk? Well, we're too old, we're too young to remember, but we've seen them on TV and heard about them from our grandparents, great-grandparents. They also sold golf balls. I are baseballs and golf balls, and I don't know that they made them, but they're there
No,
and they're selling.
They were
So
small.
they were pretty diverse in what they did as the years went on.
Then Hastings, a lot of people don't realize, Hastings, Dutton Nielsen, they were saddlemen, or harness makers. And Dad used to get a lot of his supplies from them when he was traveling before he started the shop. And but they had a building out back even that they made horse collars and traces, which was tugs. And but that was it. I think in Dutton Nielsen, they got a little museum set up in there, is showing some of the harness that they had made. But I never made it over there.
When World War I started, they got a contract with the military to supply things for them. Now, I don't know what they supplied. We should probably go to that museum and find out. But then they also did that in World War II. Because their business went down during the wars, so they contracted to do that. They still have a contract with the military, and they still make things for the military. And you know, if you've been to Hastings at all, you've probably seen this. If you've been downtown at all, you'll see this building, and it's still there. They did add this second story a few years ago, and this is all their offices. This addition on the side of it is all their offices. Okay.
Then, like at the stockyards in Omaha, there was all kinds of saddle and horse shops. And old Kennedy was in Omaha, and he was a really close friend of my dad's. And it closed early 70s. It closed. Well, I think old Kennedy, he just couldn't work anymore. And like I say, all the way up the line, there was harness and saddle makers. And then in the early 1900s, there was a hardware store in Alliance called Newberry's. And they started making saddles upstairs. Now, I never was upstairs. I'm sure it was in there, because Dad used to break saddles for him when he was on the ranch north of Whitman. They'd send the leather out on the mail, and the Dad would send the headstalls back on the mail. And there is a gentleman here that his dad took him upstairs at Newberry's and bought him a brand new saddle. Martin.
I was about 12 years old.
Yeah.
And I set the stirrups on that saddle, and I never changed them. My
Well, you never
legs
grew.
never grew. And you know, the saddles, well, you see how that little saddle, well, I guess it's turned a little bit. But the saddle was the stirrups were straight up and down. In order to be comfortable, you had to get them turned. A lot of times on a new saddle, you would take and maybe stick them in the tank and then take a stick and cut across there and turn them stirrups. Well, I didn't know about doing that, and my dad never said anything. And I just rode that saddle till them stirrups finally got turned. And so, that's the reason.
That's right.
Martin always has a good story.
Fremont also had a pretty good sized saddle factory and a harness factory. And then there was a minister here, I think he was a Lutheran minister, called me one time and he said, I've got this saddle that my great-granddad, he moved from Connecticut to Lexington. and he bought a farm, and he went into Lexington and bought this saddle. Well, this saddle was marked Plum Creek. It was built in the 1880s, and it was an excellent shape, really good shape, and really a pretty saddle. And he wanted to sell it, and I said, well, I know a fellow in Fremont that collects a lot of saddles, and he's got over 300 of them, and he said this is his most prized saddle. But it was a Rice, and it was made in Plum Creek, Nebraska, marked right on it.
And I don't know when Plum Creek became Lexington, does anybody? I don't know.
So,
I should look it up.
and then, so we're getting to the Platte Valley Saddle.
Finally, huh?
This is my dad, and he was a sandhill cowboy. And he seen a big need for somebody to go through that country, because it was all trail roads. And stop at those big ranches and repair their horses and saddles, and maybe even put heels on their boots. And I don't know exactly, I think this truck here, it was a ton truck, and I think it was like a 24 Chevy or something like that. And this ramp down here is so he could get in there, but he also had planks underneath, because he had to plank himself up some of them hills in that sand. And then tied on the back, that's an oil bath. So he would fill that with oil, and like they take it in a barn, fill it with oil, and he had a hook and a pulley, put it up on the rafters, then they dip that harness, and they bring it up and let it drip dry. And
And we did that for several years after, when we had the shop downtown.
oh yeah. And he would go from Mullen, Nebraska to Lakeside, and both sides of the road, but he would go clear up to Maryland, and that's where the U Cross Ranch was, or they called it the Pond Lake. And there, he would just unload the machine, and it was an old foot treadle stitcher, and they'd carry it up in the haymow, because that's where all the hay horns was. And there was 150 sets up in the haymow, and got 300 horses. And then a lot of smaller ranches would come into the U Cross, and he'd repair their harness, and he might stay there 2 weeks. He had a lot of stories about the bunkhouses and the cookhouses there. And this is one of our first signs, and I've got it in the shop. Dad and Mom started in 1942, and it was on 21st or 22nd and 1st, right behind Common Worms.
Right across from the Wells Fargo Bank.
Yes.
To the
And there
north.
were small brick buildings in there, and that's where they started. And he rented that building from old John Lowe. And of course, there wasn't central heating in there. They just had a coal burning stove. And Dad burned a lot of his scrap leather, because it made a good fire and a lot of heat to it. And then later on, he moved over, well, we was 2 doors west of where Texas Cafe is now. And we was there 24 years. And
Okay, thank you. Just step back a minute. Plum Creek became Lexington in 1889. So that saddle was made before then.
Oh,
Thank
boy.
you. All right. Edna was in the shop, Lyle's mother, and she, did crafts, and so she taught a lot of craft things,
Well, leather tooling.
leather tooling, and then there was the copper punching that you would do, like in a pie cabinet, they always had the punch, she did that kind of thing. So there's a picture of
That's
Lyle's
my
dad.
dad. That's mom.
Another sign, we got quite a few signs.
Yeah.
This was when, that was the color of Lyle's dad's pickup, and these were the boards that he had on
Yeah, I
his
got
side.
the
And so Lyle's mom sold the craft part of the saddle shop to her sister Lydia Wilkie. And Lydia named her business Lydia's Books and Crafts. It was a religious bookstore. And then she sold that to Bill Ballou. I'm sure most of you know Bill Ballou. And he renamed the business to Solid Rock. And of course, Bill is not there anymore and they've moved it, so. And then she started the first licensed daycare in Kearney called the Gingerbread House Day Nursery. Nancy used to work for her over here.
Yeah.
She was in school. And I have that sign hanging in our home.
And that's where I grew up. That was my dad, and, he would throw his scrap leather underneath the bench. And that's where I took my naps, and when I was a baby and everything, under there in the leather. And Dad and I got sent to Washington DC in 1975 for, it was the year before the bicentennial, and we was to demonstrate saddle and harness making, and I was demonstrating flower carving, and Dad, and they shipped a big old harness stitcher out there, and it was foot treadle, and Dad had made a bunch of tugs, and tugs on a harness was real, usually 4 layers. But this old sticker would sew them, but you had to really get at it at the time. And he would let some of the people coming through sew on them. It just really tickled them. But that was probably the highlight of my dad's life. He just loved a trip.
They put us in an old tobacco farm because we were with South Dakota, North Dakota, Nebraska, and Kansas. There were the 4 of us there. Plus there were a lot of foreign countries. It was a great time. But before that, from Kentucky, they had built a tobacco barn, which has a lot of air running through it to dry that tobacco. So that's where they put us. So that was kind of interesting too for us to see an actual tobacco barn because I'd never seen one. So.
And then they were supposed to demonstrate shearing sheep. Well, they had some FFA kids from Washington DC that was supposed to be taking care of the sheep. And one lady come by and said, "Them sheep are hot, you cool them down." So the guy was gonna start shearing, and they took a hose and completely stoked them. So they wouldn't be hot anymore. And so he couldn't do it that day. Well, the next day, and he told me, he said, "I'm just afraid that I'm gonna hit a dirt spot and get a little blood." And he did, and there was kids and women crying, and it was a mess. So he didn't shear any sheep. Then the group from South Dakota was gonna demonstrate branding. When those people found out what branding does, they put a stop to that. And so they had them branding boards, and people would just walk by them, wouldn't even look. So that wasn't a good deal. But they enjoyed our deal, I think.
Well, then there was from North Dakota, there was the high school rodeo cutting girls champion. And she was supposed to cut some calves out from the cows and stuff. They put a stop to that right away too. And Lyle made friends with the park ranger, and he said, people will get upset if you break into their house and you maybe molest their wife or the girls or something, but he said, kick the dog and they will shoot him. He said they're all about animals and everything out here, so that's why everything got shut down, because these people do not.
Did you tell them where the leather came from?
What?
Did you tell any of those people where the leather came from?
No. This is a funny story when you say that. We were staying at a University of Virginia, I think, and we were staying in some dorms, and so every night there was just this, everybody would get together and everybody who had instruments would play the instruments, and it was just a big party. So we had some young kids from the University of Maryland who were supposed to be taking care of us, you know, making sure we had what we needed and everything. And so we were talking, it was the end of June, and somebody said, well, when I get home, I said, when I get home, I gotta pick cherries. And she said, well, when I get home, I gotta butcher chickens. And so we talked about whether you chopped off their neck or if you put them on a log or if you hung them or whatever, you know. These kids turned out to be Jewish. They just, it was not a good thing. These poor kids, I'm sure they never want to come to any of these 4 states that we were representing.
But no, that was a great trip. My dad passed away in '79, and so we.
And then I went to work in a saddle shop.
I guess prior to that, Dad had a bad heart, and like I said, I worked on ranches. As soon as I got out of high school, I started working on ranches, and Dad wanted me to. He said, get out and see what the world's like. And, you know, he said, but watch the women you're running with and don't drink out somebody else's jug. So,
which is funny because his dad was a teetotaler.
And so Lynda and I got married in '70, and I worked for Morrison Court Angus out of Hastings. And I'll guarantee you, we rode more horseback than anybody in the Sandhill. There were 6 of us that rode every single day. And they had, Morrison Court had the entire Navy depot there at Hastings from Clay Center. They had the whole ammunition depot, all the grouse.
At Grand Island.
And then they had Taylor Ranch, just outside of Grand Island, on Highway 2. And then when we got married, we were living on Terry Ranch, which now is the Crane Trust, just south of Grand Island. And it's river around both sides of us. And Dad come down and he said, I'm afraid we're gonna have to close your shop. He said, if you wanna try, he said, well, we'll see if it works. Move to Kearney. So we moved to Kearney, and I wanted to at least have a Sunday off. But Morrison Court, it was 24/7, all the time. And I was calving. They're artificial bred, so I calved pretty well year-round.
So
I loved it.
AI means something different for us than it does for you today.
But I made friends with a lot of good cowboys, and probably the best one was that guy over there's dad. Oh, Al Sharp. He was raised in Mount City, and he was a good cowboy. He had a bad temper at times, but he got over it.
Al and his wife just kind of took us under their wing when we first were married, and just, you know, we were broke, we didn't have anything. They had an old deep freeze that they were gonna replace, and they gave that to us. I think it was a Gibson, maybe, or something. and I mean, it was so heavy, you couldn't lift it. And it got to the point I couldn't buy new, gaskets to go around it. So we replaced it, and two boys brought this new one out. They went to pick up this old one. Two kids couldn't lift it. Yeah. So anyway, they were great friends, and we're happy that the Sharps are with us today.
So anyhow, we moved back in '72, and I was with Dad all that time, and then when he passed away, Linda had a beauty shop across the street, and we started this first catalog.
And I have a 1983 price sheet in this catalog, which is going to be really fun. Our base price was $975
For a
in
complete
83
saddle.
for a complete saddle. Today, our base price is $5,000. That's how much inflation has changed in, what's that, 40 some years, over 45.
So we started with getting the catalog and advertising in the Western Horseman. And a lot of our catalogs always had pictures that my dad had from the Sandhills. And those two guys was, this first guy was old Harry Hoyt, and the other guy was Tug Sniper. And he was just a grub, right? Rode around and worked for a couple of days, and then he'd take off and ride the grub rod is what he did. And go ahead.
Well, Lyle, his dad's stamp was E. Henderson, Saddlemaker, Kearney, Nebraska, and Lyle refused to give that up. So he used it until 1989. So quite a while after his dad died.
My dad wanted me to take them first two bars off the first E, and that would be Ellie, and I wouldn't do it. And
I kind of put a stop to that.
then this is this is the third catalog.
That's
That saddle,
somebody they're mixed up.
that's made like the old Vaquero saddle from California, like Vicelias and long capaduros on it. And that saddle sets up in Buckeye, Arizona. I built it for a good friend of mine, Steve Corr, and they moved to Arizona, and they have a corner in their house they call the Henderson Gallery. And they've got that saddle, plus an anglery shop, sling 80, and a lot of stuff.
When we were just there in March, one of his strings was broken, so of course we couldn't take any tools with us on the airplane.
No,
So we had to find an Ace Hardware and find just something that would work so we could put strings in the saddle.
And then this was the first building. Now that's not me. I was born in '47. That's my brother, and he never was interested in cowboying or saddle making. And then in '92, we bought the old, Dad and I bought the old Gertis Variety Store on South Central. And then after my dad passed away, there was a typewriter. This was the old Bauer Drug. And there was then a typewriter place moved in. And then they moved out, and we bought that building too. We built saddles in that building, and this was kind of what we still do in boots and shoe repair. And then the retail was over here. No, actually, no.
Yeah, that was our last saddle, and then
Yeah, that was our last catalog.
here's the
We made 5 catalogs.
tootling that he did that's the front of the catalog. And then the back,
Those was the OLO riders north of Hyannis on Davis's, and it belongs to the old Senator Davis, but their brand was the OLO.
there's just one part of when you walk in the retail part, that's, this saddle sits up on our checkout counter there, and
This saddle here, Dad built in 45 and made all the silver for it. And back in the 40s and 50s, great big parade horse days. Every little town had a parade, and they always had a bunch of horses. And then my dad made silver-mounted black saddle. We have pictures over here. That was for my mom's brother, and he trained horses in Hollywood, and trained horses for Roy Rogers, Gene Opry, a whole bunch of them. And then he had a traveling show with a big Brahma bull, and that Brahma bull's been up on the Fort Theater stage and the World Theater stage. And then my dad was riding that saddle in 1948 at the Denver Stock Show. And it was a parade horse class. He didn't win the class. An old doctor from Cheyenne with a big drop-looking horse won the class, but Dad's the only one that got his picture on the Denver Post. So, little politics.
I think that's the last one. Oh, no, that's a saddle.
And then when we, 1942 to 1992, I built this saddle for our 50th anniversary. And back then, in 92, we had some sterling watch fobs made that looked just like that saddle. And we sold them, and they was all numbered. And I told a good friend of mine in Paris, Kentucky, I said, well, I'm gonna build a saddle that looks just like that. And he said, well, if you do, I'll buy it. And he did. He took it home and put it on a rack with casters. And him and his wife never had any children, so he had his two nephews. He put them nephews on there and he pulled them around the basement. So it's never seen a horse, never been outside. And one of the nephews called me here about a year ago and he said, well, Uncle Bruce died. And he said, we're using the two saddles that he was using. But he said, we don't want to take this one outside. I said, well, I'll buy it back. So I bought it back, and then another good friend of mine, which I've never met, but I got a lot of friends I've never met, back in California, and I made him 14 saddles. And he wanted me to send him a picture of this, and he said, I'd sure like to buy that, so.
We had to clear it with our son first.
So, yeah, we've made a lot of.
So we only sent this one out about 5 weeks ago.
Yeah.
4 weeks ago, we sent that to California. So.
We've made a lot of saddles. This fellow sitting over here, Gene Hunt, he's got 2 Pony Express saddles that we've made. And
For Fort Kearney.
Army McClellan, Gene and I've got a friend from California, Joe Nardoni, and he did the whole ride and documented everything on the Pony Express. And then he bought, well, the first one that I made, the Pony Express saddle, we made for the Gene Autry Heritage Center, and it's in Los Angeles. And then the others, Joe bought, and he donated one to Rock Creek Station and Fort Kearney, and then Gothenburg, I think they got one.
I think it got, I thought every Pony Express, am I wrong? I thought every Pony
Well,
Express.
and then next Friday morning at 5 a.m., we are giving the Pony Express rewrite when they hit Fort Kearney for biscuit and gravy.
Well,
Yeah,
luckily,
Gene's fixing breakfast for one of them.
luckily when Lyle and our son and another friend that also friends with Gene did the rewrite. It was during the day. It wasn't.
Yeah, we chased in old Brownie Walmsley from Lexington. He had the mail and he rode into the port. Then me and my son and my friend Dan Milton, we chased Brownie through there shooting at him with blanks. And then as we got past the fort, and then here come the Indians, so we held off. The Indians chased him through the trees down there, and then their army guys started shooting the cannon off. So it was quite a day.
So get up at 5 o'clock in the morning next week and go out there and see that.
So,
That's the last of it. Oh,
is there
gosh, what'd I hit? Oh,
Oh, zoom.
Well-
oh yeah, there I zoomed it in.
Oh.
So you can
showing
see
it up?
So
Yeah.
Lyle,
Yeah.
over the years, Lyle, how many saddles have you built?
The one he's working on now is 2,751.
That's right, about 3. And I've enjoyed every bit of
I
it.
forgot I had the video so you could see that whole saddle. We haven't done
Oh,
this since last October, a year ago in October, so.
How many saddle makers are left? You, is there one up north, by Valentine, saddle maker yet, or, you know?
If you,
No, well, go ahead.
if you Google saddle makers in Nebraska, you come up with a few names. But we're the only full-time one.
Yeah.
In Nebraska right now. Some of them, like there's a guy who moved from Colorado, Kimball, 3-4 years ago,
Yeah.
but he's no longer making saddles, he's selling patterns, like for shafts or that type of thing. There's Denny Rose and Arthur, but the last time we talked to him, he didn't have any saddles to make. He was making women's black leather bras for Sturgis. So if you want a black leather bra, go to Arthur, Nebraska.
I will quit before I start.
So, anyway, but then there's, you know, a few others that do some repair and, for like Mel Parker, up
Yeah, I knew
north
Mel.
here, yeah. But they're not full-time saddle makers. This is our business. This is what we do. We don't do purses, we don't do billfolds, sorry, everybody. We don't do shoe repair. We do saddles and
Now, we
things that go
probably
with
had to
it.
quit the shoe repair and back in, when was it we started doing shoes? 90. It was like 92 or 3.
Yeah.
We had a lot of customers, we had customers all over the world. We built saddles for Switzerland, Germany, France, Japan, just all over. And we had some people here in the United States that said, you need to go to that show in Columbus, Ohio, the Equine Affair.
Well, that wasn't our first show.
No, our first show, we got in Las Vegas during the National Finals. And we did that for 10 years. And that was really always good, but we took stuff that we made. And then we did Columbus, Ohio, we did that for 10 years. And then we did Madison, Wisconsin, in the Midwest Horse Fair. And it just got to be too much for us. It was too much work, especially when we built and everything. And so we had to quit doing that.
So, I guess, I don't have anything else to say.
Yeah,
So I guess we're open for questions.
yeah, they might,
How did you get invited in 1975 to go to Virginia how'd that happen? Was that because of the bicentennial?
it had something to do with the college.
Yeah, some young lady came out from UNL, and they were trying to find, people to go. Well, this is a story, so I don't remember when they came, but yeah, so she said, we'll be in touch and everything. Well, about the 1st of June, we got a phone call, I think, or something, they wanted to know why we hadn't shipped anything or anything. They said, we don't even know, you know, we haven't heard anything since we heard everything out. Do you remember the tornado in Omaha that took out the post office? That's where our mail was, it never got to us.
Oh.
So from the 1st of June until, and we had to ship things yet that week, so we were limited to what we could ship. So the harness stitcher, there's another miniature saddle that we have in the shop that we took, all the leather, everything, it had to be shipped yet that week, and they paid for all that you can do. Make arrangements for all of us to go to Washington DC. And back then, Frontier was the, you know, it was World War II surplus planes that flew out of here, I swear they were surplus. And so it was E. Henderson and E. Henderson, Lyle's folks, L. Henderson and L. Henderson, us. We got to, we flew out of Grand Island into Omaha to Chicago. At Chicago, we didn't have tickets to go on, only 2 people did, one E. Henderson and one L. Henderson. Because somebody erased the other one because they thought it was, and this wasn't a computer thing back then. So, anyway, we had to get that all straightened out and then had to straighten it out at the other end to make sure we had tickets to come home. And then Lyle and his dad got to stay in the college dormitories, and they took us right downtown, Lyle's mother and I, right downtown into this hotel, along with all other spouses, you know, only the spouses. Well, that was such a disaster that the next night they made arrangements for all of us to be at the campus with them. So, you know, it was like a 3-hour trip, because we were in Virginia, and they took us, that's where they were staying, was the University of Virginia. So, it was quite the deal, but it was a lot of fun once we got out of downtown DC.
Lyle, how many hours do you think it takes to make a saddle?
Well, when I was 20 and 30 years younger, I always kind of planned I could do two saddles in a month. But now it takes me, well, people are actually ordering fancier saddles. A lot of flower carving, that takes time. And it's been taking 4 to 5 weeks to do one. And I've got a good friend up at Dunning, and they've got a son that just turned 16, and they come in last winter, and they've got about 10 of those saddles, but he said, I want to get order a saddle for Ray for his graduation. And his wife said, now Lyle, you've got 4 years to do it. I said, well, Gretchen, in 4 years, I'm gonna be 80 years old. You think I can do it? Oh, yeah. Well, I said, I think I'm gonna get it done a little quicker now. And Linda just put the first quart of oil on it today.
Oh, wow.
And so, it'll be done next week. But we've got quite a few ahead. And I'll sure be into 26 or so before I get them, if I don't sell anymore. But I want to keep doing it as long as I can and think I'm doing a good job.
We just had that conversation, didn't we, Gene?
Yep.
A few minutes ago. He's not gonna retire, he's not gonna retire. I don't know, his wife is retired. Well, she runs the ranch, but I'll never get to retire.
Now, I'm having too much fun. So, is there any?
Party time.
Go ahead.
For your leather supplies, does it take a while to get that in, or have a stockpile?
No, at our age, we don't want to stockpile anything. I go in a ball game and they said, do you want to use your rewards or save them? I said, at my age, I want to use them. So we don't order a lot ahead of time. We always have some stuff, but no, we don't have any problems.
Being our stuff is mainly custom, then we only have to order,
Just what you need?
you know, like the trees I get, the saddle trees, I don't make them. I've got a good friend in Vernal, Utah that builds them, and he'll make them to my specifications. whatever size I tell him it needs to be and how it's gonna fit a horse. We have a lot of customers bring their horse. And I have to figure out what's the correct bar measurement, so it sets on that horse. And I had a lady last week from Grand Island, that I made her a really nice saddle. And she, come in, brought her horse, and she said, now my saddle you made fits this horse perfect, but my son-in-law uses one of my horses, and he put white spots on her back. And that's just saying it doesn't fit correctly. And, so you build a saddle for him, and, cause he's gonna be riding this horse. And then my grandson, Isabel built one from him too. And,
That was Monday.
yeah,
Seems like last week, but it was just Monday.
she's got 20 head of horses, and she, doesn't want them using her saddle, their saddle. Wants my saddle on her horse. So, and that, back in about 90, I think it was 93, I had the chance to sell them tool buildings on South Central. And so, then we just moved, we was 10 years, or 3 years behind them. So we moved the shop, and we had Morton put that building up for us, and our house is just south of there. And it really works out a lot better.
I forgot what I was gonna say. Oh, it was very interesting for us. You know, around here, we make saddles basically for ranches, although they're using side-by-sides more now than anything. And so most of the people we're using actually use their saddles. When we get back east, and most of our customers are women, and they belong to riding clubs. And they have, like, you get up in Ohio and then get over into Pennsylvania and New York, they got hundreds and hundreds of miles of trails for horses that these people ride in. So that was kind of different for us. And they always travel in groups because they all belong to a club, this riding club or something. And it's like, do you think this color saddle will match my horse? And we had a lot of little things like horsehair key chains and stuff, you know. Do you think this will match my pickup? We're out here where they use duct tape and band twine.
There was another question back there.
How do you raise your horse in the saddle?
Measuring the horse for a saddle.
The way you figure out just how he's built, if he's got any weathers, you know, and if they're high, then you'll make the bars a little bit narrower. And there's some horses that's real short backed. So you gotta figure that. On the saddle tree, you've got 2 bars. That's what sets on the horse. Then you've got the swell, and there's the gullet is up at the top. And once the saddle's made, you really can't measure or get a correct measurement. But like on a quarter horse, if he's high weathered and kind of a semi-thoroughbred, then you would go 6 wide or 6 1/4. But if it's a quarter horse, then you go 6 1/2. But sometimes real flat-backed horses, big shoulders and stuff, you need a 4/4 horse, and that's 7. And then the bars come like this. And you just gotta, I just usually take a tree out there and set it on the horse. And then I can see where, if the end of the bar is really pushing down and there's a lot of light up above, then it needs to be wider.
But not everybody do we even see the person or the horse, so we get lots of pictures. We used to get, years before we did, email and everything, people would take a wire and put it across their horses, the front and the back.
And then back over the kidney.
And then they would lay it down and draw, and usually the only piece of paper you have big enough is Christmas wrapping paper, so we got a lot of Christmas wrapping paper. But now they send me dozens of pictures, email, and we'll tell them we want a picture from this side and that side, and we want one with the saddle that they're using, all different angles, so I may get 40 pictures of their
Then I wanna
horses.
get up like on a fence or a ladder and take from the tail head to where the mane starts, so I can see how the horse is. Cause there's some horses that don't have a little sway there, so the bars have gotta be pretty straight. They might just be completely flat back.
And the bars are what's under this part of the saddle.
And what are the bars made of then? When you say bars?
They're wood
That's
covered with
like,
hide.
like two, one-bys, that's what sets together the horse.
Yeah, but
And
she
then the
wanted to know what,
swell is put on.
she wanted to know what it was made of.
Oh,
Yeah, it's the wood.
Wood.
Usually
White.
they use pine.
white or yellow pine, most of them are made of.
We've had people ask, why don't you use oak? Oak is not forgiving, and you can't put a nail in it. You have to screw everything in. And, it just, do you remember what the pine tree? Oh, that one's a little bit more forgiving and will give a little bit, so, which you need.
You know, they make favorite fiberglass trees and stuff like that. But my dad always said, if you tie on their critter, he's gonna give a little bit, and the rope's gonna give, and you want that rawhide covered tree so it gives a little bit, and your horse is gonna give, but if it's solid, it'll just snap. And, so we've never really got into the fiberglass or the Kel-bar, they call it now. There's a lot of them using it, but, this little saddle, it's not for a dog. People think it is, but it's years ago, the traveling salesman, this would be a
Salesman sample.
salesman sample. And that's what they carried, cause they either rode the train or a bus or whatever. And they would have a little bag and they would have some of the company that he was traveling for, some of the items that they made. And, I had made one, that's kind of a California style, with the long tapaderos and my tree man, well, I built one similar to that for a friend of mine in Billings, Montana, and then for Christmas one year, I got this box, and I didn't think I had anything coming from Timberline Saddle Tree, and there was another little tree in there, and he just said, I just wanted to make you a Christmas present. So we're not gonna sell that saddle. We're gonna keep, and our daughter-in-law, she said, you better keep that, till the family needs it. I said, okay. So, any other questions, or?
Well, if
Please,
not-
well, wait a minute. Please ask if I made any saddles for celebrities.
Did you make any saddles for celebrities?
Hundreds and hundreds of them. But to me, a celebrity is the men and women that go out and saddle a horse when the sun's coming up and goes to do a day's work. That's a celebrity to me. So, that's what it is. Well, thank you.
I've got photo albums of saddles that Lyle has made and other things that I'll probably set on these tables and we'll go through them. Look at all these catalogs if you want to. Oh, and then this is something that Lyle had told that we just have a hanging.
I love to do animals, but I like them to look like the animal, not a cartoon. There's been a lot of, the old saddle companies used to put horses and things on there, but it didn't really look like